All right, you were just watching those television show theme songs from, decades back, and you used the word possibility. There
Mm-hmm.
was so much possibility. Talk more about what you mean by that, especially as you go back to the Mary Tyler Moore theme song and that stuff. What brought up the idea of so much possibility?
The overall feeling of the way that television shows were being put together, and just put anything out there and try it. Let's just fill up programming.
Sure.
The bands were doing experimental sort of things. They were all coked up and ready to go and perform. Right in the late '70s, early '80s, you had FM. So this whole new spectrum of sound.
Oh, FM radio. Wow. I don't even have a way of thinking before FM.
AM radio, where you hear now it's religious and
Sure.
Art Bell and stuff like that.
Maybe I would think of it as weather, maybe, or
sure. So when FM came out, you've got stereo, you've got all this higher fidelity, and so there's just this explosion of sound and color television.
Yeah.
Come on,
Yeah.
I mean, it just seemed like everything was wide open.
And that's different than today. How?
It seems crowded now.
It is crowded out there, but some of us are up here at the top, especially in the podcast game. Anyway, we're talking about these old theme songs and theme shows. We were looking at that stuff because we're getting a downbeat today from the late Ed Asner. How about you teach us youngsters about Ed Asner?
Well, Carl Fredricksen from Up is probably his most recognizable role for this generation.
I mean, had us crying, and we ain't been in the theater but for 5 minutes.
Right. If you want to go back a little bit further, he was Santa Claus and Elf.
With what's the name?
Yep.
With the comic.
And what's her name? Yep.
He was on
Will Ferrell.
Will Ferrell. You know who I'm talking about the whole time.
I do.
And anyway, he was on there.
Yep.
Oh, he sure was.
He was
Santa Claus.
Claus.
Up. Oh,
Right.
wow. I remember that. And then
really
Bob Newhart was the head elf or something.
Right.
So that movie was shouting all y'all out. Anyway,
It was
Ed
a
Asner.
really long career that he had. He did some voice work in the Boondocks. He was Lou Grant in the Mary Tyler Moore Show, which was set in Minneapolis, about a young, unmarried, no children, independent woman gonna make it after all. That's even in the theme song. You gotta have an insult in there, a sideways insult too.
Sure.
You're gonna make it after all. Then he went on to do Lou Grant. After that stopped, he was the only actor to play the same role in both a comedy and a drama.
Yeah.
And I grew up with him on the television. He just seemed to be that, he played that character of the gruff but lovable uncle.
Yeah.
That sort of vibe. But if you knew him behind the scenes, he was also an activist. He was very active in SAG-AFTRA. He donated a lot of money to up-and-coming filmmakers. He was playing a bit of being this gruff, coarse exterior guy when really he was just a big sweetheart.
And, obviously a huge loss to the world. So you did mention that Ed Asner had been in the Boondocks. So I just thought we would, again, get a downbeat from there. We're just going to listen to a little bit of this. The character that he plays is Edward Onceler. And I looked all over the Boondocks catalog. And I think this is a good one to look back to. So let's take a quick listen here.
These are hard times. Americans need inspiration. People want real life to be like in the movies, with good guys and bad guys and black guys, all that shit. This country needed a rallying cry, a reminder of why it's great to be an American.
So, you just make this stuff up?
No! Several overpaid members of the Writers' fucking Guild of America make this stuff up.
This is just a joke to you. We're talking about the lives of innocent Americans.
Innocent American. Singular. Daniel Stuckey, a.k.a. Dan the Security Man. Have you ever met Dan Stuckey, Jack?
So that little skit, that little excerpt from the Boondocks is in a different context for me now because you talked about his activism with SAG-AFTRA and all that stuff. So it sounds like a little bit of shade in there, but
100%, 100%.
But even out of that context, I think there's something to be said. We're going through a lot and people want a hero, maybe even, someone to blame. But I think that's interesting there. And especially for him to bring that idea and all of his career, all of his legacy on to that show. So what I instantly thought of, how long before we get the Afghanistan film? Based on what he's saying, we people want to see the hero. It's not about the safety of us all. It's about the safety of one who, in the 21st century, I think it's safe to say, can embody, that American, the Americanness. Or I kind of hear that in what he's saying. It made me think of that.
I bet you that movie's being written right now if it isn't finished.
How do you feel about that? Because I don't think we've gotten. Is there a Vietnam film? Maybe I haven't watched it or anything. I mean, Forrest Gump and other things, but
Well, sure. You didn't see Full Metal Jacket?
Okay, so all right, I need to go back and watch my films, but
Apocalypse Now, man, I'll watch that one
okay,
with you.
okay, all right,
Yeah.
we'll get to it. I'm ignorant here, but that definitely made me think of that. The other thing that I wanted to ask you, we have Ed Asner in the studio with the Boondocks people. Okay, all right. He, to a degree, stuck his neck out to be there, or had to have a level of comfort or affirmation of himself. I wonder, what would you ask him about that experience, being in, the midst of true hotepery, true cooning, as portrayed by the neighbor. I'm forgetting his name right now, but just being around all of this deep blackness.
Well, he would have been in his mid to late 80s when he did that.
Sure.
So he was probably past the give a damn point. Right? Come on. Now when you get to a certain age, you'll go and talk to anybody.
Yeah.
Or you speak your mind, if your pants are on too high and it's hot out, you'll just belt out, my teeth itch. Whatever it is. So I think also there's a reason that they went after Ed for that role, for that sound. So his reputation probably preceded him.
Yeah.
For the Boondocks. They knew who they were getting.
Yeah. I think that's really a mark of someone who really had a consequential and important career. Not only someone who entertained the white folks for decades, but someone who even found the opportunity and accepted the opportunity to get deep black and to have a reason for me to, think about his legacy. So rest in peace, rest in power to the late Ed Asner. Let's get started. I'm Garrett McQueen.
I'm Scott Blankenship.
And this is TRILLOQUY. The theme goes, I know I say it every other week, but I sit here and bob as we're listening to it. You composed one. You got one out when we did that. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Opus 114. Welcome to, I'm out of my mind. Welcome to Opus 114 of the TRILLOQUY podcast. That's what I was going to say. This is TRILLOQUY.
Welcome.
To the returning listeners, thank you for keeping, as I've been saying, keeping this boat afloat and really supporting this project of ours. We really appreciate it and couldn't do it without you. To the new listeners, or to the semi-new listeners, thank you so much for joining. This is a podcast that takes the phrase and the concept and the idea of classical music and contextualizes it in a different way. We take news, we take stories from the world and apply it to the canon as we see it, not just the Western European assortment of it, but the global assortment of it. So thank you so much for checking us out. You can find more information on our website, TRILLOQUY.org. You can also contribute and listen to past opuses there at TRILLOQUY.org. Support for TRILLOQUY, in addition to coming from the listeners, coming from you, is made possible in part by the Shuttleworth Foundation. The Shuttleworth Foundation funds people who are unafraid to reimagine the world and the way we live in it. You can learn more about the Shuttleworth Foundation at shuttleworthfoundation.org. I would also like to send a huge thank you to Dr. Antonio Kyler from FSU for getting TRILLOQUY a couple of interns. That's exciting. So I think finally, maybe the Instagram page is going to get some movement. I've been doing okay, doing my best on the Twitter. But listen,
I thought for sure that you would be saying, "Would you make me another wine?"
well, it's virtual. Otherwise, no, I wouldn't do that. So, shout out to Dylan and shout out to Jenna. We'll even have to maybe get them in on the show at some point and see what they think about all this nonsense we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all of my announcements. So let's go ahead and move into movement one. So I had actually planned to start the first movement by giving a shout out to Kalena Bovell, but you had actually planned to do the same. So we can give her a double sharp.
That's
there.
right.
How about you talk to us about what Kalena has been doing?
Last week on Tuesday, she made her debut at the BBC Proms.
Yeah, that's a big deal. That's a huge deal.
Man, playing the Avery Hall.
Yeah.
Oh, the Royal. No, not the Avery Hall. The Royal Albert Hall.
Yeah, yeah.
And you have to say the in front of it, evidently.
Just like Ohio State.
Is it the Ohio State?
The Royal Albert Hall.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, for folks who don't know, Kalena Bovell is part of the TRILLOQUY family. First and foremost, featured in season 1 and also for the replay during the break between season 2 and season 3. A favorite. She's the assistant conductor at the Memphis Symphony Orchestra, a Black Latina who is changing the game down there. Always proud to think about her in my hometown, and she's made her way all the way over to Europe.
Right. So she made her debut, and the program included. She did. You need to help me with this orchestra again because I always mispronounce it. Chineke. Okay, thank you. With an exclamation point.
And you met the founder, Chi-Chi, at Sphinx. I know you met a lot of people, but yeah.
Yep, and I'm old, so my memories aren't all that great. But on the program, she had Florence Price's Piano Concerto in one movement. The whole second half was Samuel Coleridge-Taylor Symphony in A minor. Fela Sowande's African Suite, and Hiawatha's Wedding Feast, the Overture by Samuel Coleridge-Taylor. And not only did she say it went great, so congratulations to her, but I found a little bit of synergy in an article that came across from the New York Times one day after she made her debut. And the title of it is When Europe Offered Black Composers an Ear. So basically the story just talks about how musically audiences were more, or seemed to be more accepting and have a bit more of a thirst for music by Black composers than they did here in the United States.
I have to give that title just a little flat.
I know it.
like when they bothered to care about what we Negroes think about classical music anyway.
But they frame it around the story of an Afro-Caribbean conductor named Rudolph Dunbar who. He did really well in Germany in front of a German audience. He got all these doors open. He was going around the UK.
Yeah.
And Dunbar also did some work in social justice, racial justice, and he believed that activism and classical music could not be separated. That that was going to be something for him brought together. So it starts painting this picture of a magnanimous crowd over in Europe, right?
Yeah.
And they even highlight the Chineke Orchestra as a group of mainly musicians of color playing together. So they point out that, that's an English-based group that's doing the work now. Okay, so they bring up Samuel Coleridge-Taylor, and I was listening to Hiawatha's Wedding Feast a couple times over the last week, and I wanted to get your idea on Samuel's father left before he left England for back to Sierra Leone before he even knew that the mother was pregnant.
Sure.
Right? And he left.
Legend has it.
He left because, well, that's right. But he left because, he studied in London and got his medical degree, and he was practicing and took over this small practice and had financial hardships due to the fact that people didn't want to go and be served by a Black doctor unless they were being overseen by a white one.
Right.
Okay, so What do you see in that dichotomy, that mixture of they'll watch a black conductor play black music?
Go on, keep going.
Am I out of
Keep
line?
No, keep going. Keep going.
But they don't want to be seen by a black doctor.
Help me. I kind of get where you're going, but help me make the connection.
You got this trigger finger here.
You're drawing a connection between folks not trusting a black doctor and what?
They'll watch you do the music.
Right.
But I don't want you touching me in the doctor's office.
That's the history of black folks in white ecosystems. What I think is a more, first of all, that's a very interesting thing to point out. What I think is a more obvious version of what you're saying, and just to make sure that I understand, it's like down south, when you go to an Ole Miss football game, they'll cheer for you until the game is done. But they don't want to see you in the parking lot. As a matter of fact, they might call the police on you.
Well, this is sort of the thing that I'm getting at, and so I'm wondering, how then is it really any better? Was it really any better there for them then?
No, absolutely not. I used to spend a lot of time on that app Clubhouse that we talked about a little bit, and early in the morning, when I get up and I would get on the Clubhouse, it's nighttime over there in England. So right. I'm getting in all of the activism rooms and all of the Black Lives Matter rooms based in London. And the stories that they tell, they talk about how it's worse over there, but we don't see it because England has more of a system of covering and a system of oppression. They're the originators of it all, after all. So I think that I don't forgot the question you're asking.
Was it really any better then?
Oh, I'm sure it wasn't. And I think a lot about proximity to whiteness for black people. So being able to play this white orchestral music, was, proof enough to them that I guess black people had some intelligence or were worth something. And that was something that they could enjoy. There was no physical risk there for them to sit there and listen to that music. But when you're talking about my health, no, they're going to make sure that there's a white overseer. I would imagine it would be very similar with finances. A lot of those people wouldn't have had a black bookkeeper without somebody looking over his shoulder or whatever. So, the racism is real.
I do realize that there was a span of several decades between Samuel Coleridge-Taylor's birth, and when Mr. Dunbar was over leading orchestras.
Right.
I'm sure, and I don't know if that much of a shift could happen in 2 or 3 decades.
So let's bring this back to music. So Dunbar, facing all of these challenges. Obviously, well, I don't know, obviously, because I haven't been to the doctor over in England, but I would imagine that they don't have the white overseers in the room anymore. But yeah, there's a lot more progress that needs to happen. And these stories that you're describing aren't that long off. So having Kalena and the Dominque Orchestra, at the Royal Albert Hall, I suppose is some bit of progress. But again, you're getting me into my wannabe Hotep bag again. We're approximating whiteness, right? Like we're proving ourselves based on our ability to do traditionally white things. And yes, this music is by black folks, but Fela Sowande spent many of his years in London learning. And I think even after that, he spent the rest of his life, for a large portion of his life, over in Canada. So there are two sides to the coin. We celebrate the Dominque Orchestra, we celebrate Kalena, but if you're going to bring up those sorts of stories, I can't help but to, think about what is the next step. Okay, we've made it to the proms, playing the Western orchestral music. What comes next? When are our stories based on our historical perspectives gonna be centered there. I think that's even the next step. So not that we haven't made any progress, but the journey is not done. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make.
Well, maybe it's not far off. If you go back to 2008, 2009, there was a series called The Proms After Dark, which was, clubs and non-traditional spaces. And they would do orchestral performances with a DJ. It was a white DJ.
The white DJ isn't my problem. My problem is the marginalization of that aesthetic.
What, to be after dark?
Right. We always talk about like the specialty shows or the other things, that are the peripheral, that are the accessory to the main, traditional thing. So yes, okay, great. Proms After Dark. That's phenomenal. We need to bring it to the light. Amen. Amen. We're going to talk about some church music later anyway. But do you see what I'm saying?
Oh,
there?
no, you don't have any convincing there for me. I'm just.
So to that, to have Kalena and Chineke up there, not during I think their Black History Month is October actually, but like to not have them during Black History Month or Martin Luther King, to have them on that main stage because this music deserves that platform. It is important. I want to make sure I'm speaking clearly. I'm not saying that is not important and a huge thing.
Oh, I don't think anybody thinks
that. What's the next step? Let's get what you described, the Proms After Dark, on the regular stage and streamed like everything else does. So there's always a little dust in the corners, like my teacher used to say. Shout out to Judy. One thing I wanted to bring up before we leave this accidental, I searched the internet to make sure everybody was putting some respect on Kalena's name. Okay. Yes. I could not wait to find somebody trying to shade her because I was going to get them together on this platform. I did. This is TRILLOQUY. We have to bring it to the people. So I didn't find it because Kalena is incredible. And obviously no one would say anything about her technique and whatever she's doing. But I did find something that I wanted to read here. This is from sg.news.yahoo.com. So I don't know if that's a specific regional thing. This is an article by Barry Millington. It says, Chineke, Kalena Bovell, and Geneva Kane Mason Proms Review. Minor revelations I'd gladly hear again. Okay, so I'm just going to read this much from it. This is in the middle of it. It says, the Nigerian-born Fela Sowande established himself in England in the 30s, where he was an organist in Holborn and jammed with Fats Waller. His African suite of 1944 betrays no enthusiasm for modernists such as Britten or Stravinsky, recalling rather the nostalgic vein of Dvorak. You talked about the overseers, right? Mm. So Dvorak for this writer is the overseer of Fela Sowande. Okay, let me continue just a little bit here. It says, I saw more than one silver head bobbing appreciatively to the music. You see, Fela Sowande got him in there bobbing their head. Yeah.
Paints a picture, doesn't it?
He said, though, again, it's not a profound score, but it's an accomplished and enjoyable one. There's always just these backhanded things. You talked about you're going to make it after all. They get on my nerves. They get on my nerves. Mm-hmm. So Barry Millington, I have more important things to talk about in the TRILLOQUY today, so you're lucky. But let's go through this with a fine-tooth comb, people, as we're seeing more Black folks on more of these stages at these predominantly white institutions. Do not let the shade get by you, because the shade is definitely there. Anyway, shout out to Kalena Bovell again. A huge congratulations and a huge congrats to everyone over there at Chineke. I hope to make it over there or be invited to play sometime. That would be great. But but in the meantime, we're going to transition out of this first accidental, this first sharp, with a piece of music that was performed at the proms. And one of the reviews that I read, the reviewer said that the way Kalena conducted the one movement from the African suite, the Onipe movement, that's named after a village in Nigeria. They especially liked the colors that Kalena pulled out of there. So obviously we don't have that recording. This is the CBC Vancouver Orchestra playing this, but we're going to listen to a little bit of that Onipe to get us into our next accidental. That's what's hard to conduct. We can all flail our arms fast and crazy and get in the orchestra to really sound juiced up and loud, but you have to have some delicate technique to get that sound exactly the way you want it to sound, the way that the composer suggested that it sounds. So, again, shout out to Kalena.
It sounds like she nailed it.
The CD that comes from, I actually brought that a couple years ago, I think like weeks before Opus 1 of TRILLOQUY. I was on the Need to Know podcast, a hip hop podcast over in New York. Shout out to the Need to Know people. And I brought everyone a CD and
sure.
And Alex, his on the Need to Know podcast, his folks are from Nigeria, so I brought him some of that music by Fela Sowande, and he knew who Fela Sowande was. So a name that is very important and celebrated not only on the motherland, but over there in England. For years in Canada, and finally here in the United States. So it's really exciting to see more names popping up. I hope the name Fela Sowande becomes as familiar as Florence Price and William Grant Still. We got a little bit of work before we get there, but we'll definitely get there. So that's some really great news. I wanted to bring in one quick sharp. I don't want to talk about it for a long time, but Scott, the Met is bike.
Is it?
The Metropolitan Opera is bike. Let me read here from the New York Times. Name of this article, Met Opera reaches deal with orchestra, paving way for reopening. It says here, the Metropolitan Opera has struck a labor deal with its orchestra, officials announced Tuesday, paving the way for its musicians to return to work and for the company, the largest performing arts organization in the nation, to resume performances next month after being shut down for more than a year by the pandemic.
The opening show is?
The opening show is a work by Terrence Blanchard.
Oh, okay.
I'll talk about that in a second. But what I did want to bring up, New York got hit really hard, especially back when COVID was scary, back when people wore their masks and things. But we also reported, here on TRILLOQUY, how much these musicians were making. So a lot of them were retiring, and a lot of people can't go long without that paycheck. I get that. I'm not trying to minimize that, but I also have to say that many of these folks were among the more privileged people in the arts and across the board to have lost their jobs or to have been without some checks. Most of all, Peter Gelb, out of everybody, he's quoted in this article. He says, the members of the Met's great orchestra have been through Herculean challenges during the 16th months of the shutdown as we struggled to keep the company intact. He went on to say, now we look forward to rebuilding and returning to action. Now, let me make myself clear. I know it was a rough time for a lot of those musicians, despite the six-figure salary that they were making before, okay? How would Peter Gelb and his multiple millions and his penthouse apartment know what the musicians were going through? That's my thing.
Wasn't that paid for, that apartment?
You're telling me something, and that makes it even worse. If so, that doesn't sound ridiculous. That sounds like something.
No, I thought it was in the story that you shared. But
Sure, yeah. So, that's my thing. We get, labor unions and orchestra committees, going through all this hard work, negotiating and X, Y, and Z. They finally get somewhere, and Peter Gelb walks out to say, oh, it's been such a hard time, but we're so glad to get back into action. It really makes me think about this top-down structure that so many of these arts institutions have that has to go. And let's take it away from arts institutions. Amazon, how would people feel if Jeff Bezos got on TV talking about, oh, it's been such a hard time for our workers, but we're ready. Like, how would he know? How would he,
Didn't he say something similar? Like, hey, thanks to all my employees and everybody who shops at Amazon because you made this possible.
I can't.
You put me in space.
I can't.
That was his quote.
I cannot. As I have new frames for my glasses coming in through Amazon. You see, he set it up to where we have to, just like capitalism. Anyway, let me not chase a rabbit off the trail. I just wanted to name that and speak to that part of the article. Again, always a little dust in the corners. Let's look at the people who want to walk out when everything is solved or things are better and say, oh, things were so hard, but we're ready to get back to it.
It would have been worse if they would have came back with like Turandot, number one.
Sure. I think aside from what they're opening with, here folks are still upset at Peter Gelb, so
Right.
he needs to watch what he says and not try to claim some proximity to the folks who were actually on the ground and doing what they had to do. But you know, you're bringing up what they're coming back with. So the first opera that the Met is going to present is Fire Shut Up in My Bones, like a jazz inspired opera by Terence Blanchard. And if you don't know who Terence Blanchard is, he's been a black composer who's been all over the field writing music. I think he did the score to Black Klansman. I think I talk about.
I used to play his albums when I was a jazz host back in the.
So he's been out here. Yeah.
Yep.
And, you know, of course, Scott, we talk about firsts and how that doesn't need to be the story, but Terence Blanchard is the very first black composer to have an opera at the Met, and the Met is over 100 years old. So in the spirit of equity, that means we need to do what for the next for the next 100 years? We need to do what? You don't have an opinion?
No.
Is that what it is? Go ahead. I'm not going to press the safe button. Go ahead.
Repeat the question for me.
In the spirit of equity, if this is the first time we're getting a black opera, that means it needs to be a lot more black operas and a lot more regularly, maybe even every opera.
Oh, I'm sorry. I got lost. Yeah. I didn't sleep a lot last night. Sorry.
No, it's all good.
Yeah.
No, but
I see what you're saying.
But when we talk about that word equity and the
Right.
spirit of equity.
No, because my elevator pitch was, 400 years of black music.
Yeah.
And
of other things as well.
right. But it depends.
I'm joking.
It depends on what floor we're going to as to whether or not I get there.
Will Liverman is going to be in Fire Shut Up in My Bones, another member of the TRILLOQUY family. So shout out to him. And look, the last thing I'll say is that, again, we are not done. What we talked about, the proms, you know, what we can do to go a little bit further. The work is not done here at the Met either. We're going to have this black opera on stage. If the audience is all white, there's still lots of work to be done, and not even just for the sake of diversity, but think about the city of New York. I know you say you've never been there, but it's it's the world in a city. So if everybody there is white, I mean, that means you aren't actually serving New York City. And I feel like that's a fairly easy concept to understand and wrap your mind around. So as we continue to put these black operas on stage, I don't know if this is the only one. I'm gonna have to come back next week and say something else. I don't have that fact. But as we continue to diversify what we put on stage, we have to put even more intentionality behind who is in the audience. Because if it's one thing that I am not gonna sit here and see the arts turn into is white folks being entertained by black folks, and that's just the end of the discussion. That can't be where we end up. That would be a repeat of, you know, the 20s and the 30s, going all the way back to Josephine Baker days and all that.
And this article from the New York Times talking about how British audiences and German audiences were more open to black performers in music then.
Oh, I can't. The orchestra is.
What did I give that? Did I give that a flatral? Was that a?
Is that what we did? You want a flatral? There you go. Flatral for you there. Now the orchestra, the Met Opera Orchestra, is coming back in its own, you know, little concert. I think it said they're playing Mahler 2, and they're also gonna do a little bit of, or I think the entire Requiem of Verdi, Giuseppe Verdi's Requiem, because it's also the 20-year anniversary of 9/11 over there. So the Requiem, they feel, is a great way to do that. So we're going to hear a little bit of Verdi's Requiem, but I mean, we gotta hear the part everybody wants to hear. Let's go ahead and jump into it. Does that one, or has that one come around a lot for you in your radio programming? I'm sure that's not something that somebody wants to hear, you know, at I
10
don't know,
o'clock at night.
1 p.m. or 1 a.m. or whatever, but
Yeah, not much.
but one of those one of the more famous excerpts from the Western classical repertoire inside of this piece that is supposed to talk about, a requiem, talking about those who have gone, and all of those tender moments. But it has that in there. Of course, I remember it from Django, and they used a really great recording too. I'm gonna have to go see who that was.
Yeah.
The one we just heard was the KPM Philharmonic Orchestra, and I thought it might have been an orchestra in South Korea or something, but this is actually an orchestra in London, and it's the orchestra that records at Abbey Road Studios, the famous Abbey Road. So all sorts of people getting paid to play music over there in England, and they didn't have to, go through all this stuff that the Met musicians went through. But we're talking about a different system, publicly funded arts orchestra members that are state employees, and there can be some fear, some hesitation there as well. But anyway, so the last accidental in this first movement, I want to give it a sharp, but I'm gonna give it a natural because it's naturally a part of capitalism, and we have yet to see what this does or what the broader opinion is. I'm reading here from TheVerge.com. It says, Apple buys classical music streaming service Prime Phonic. Let me read a little bit. Apple Music is pushing more extensively into classical music. Today, Apple announced that it has acquired Prime Phonic, a service that specializes in streaming the classical genre and will incorporate the app's functionality and playlists into Apple Music. The result will be a significantly improved classical music experience, Apple said in a press release. There will also be a standalone Apple Music classical app coming sometime in 2022. So the first thing I want to ask you about here, Scott, when it comes to classical music streaming services, just these apps or whatever that people go to listen to their Western classical music, do you feel or do you not feel that it's in any competition with classical radio? It's one thing to go to live radio, and it's another thing to get it on demand. Do you feel like there is any feeling of competition there from your perspective?
Not yet.
You think, so you're saying that classical radio just sees itself as, in its own lane, and there's no one to, knock the car off the rails?
Let's broaden it out and just say public broadcasting.
Sure.
Okay, because public broadcasting for a lot of people is the only media that they get. We're talking about more rural and the backcountry.
Right.
There's also the issue that they have to get around. I don't think streaming services are going to take over terrestrial radio for a while until they find a way around alerting people to emergencies.
Yeah. Back when Prime Phonic was, around, because they've deleted the Twitter and everything. They cleaned house. But back when somebody was on Prime Phonic's social media, we had a couple of exchanges on Twitter. So they will put out these ads or put out these tweets talking about the Prime classical experience or whatever. And I'm sitting here and it's 3 a.m. and I'm, behind the microphone on live radio. And my argument would be, well, music over here is being contextualized, is being delivered. There is a not a partner, but somebody there with you.
Yeah.
Just the company, and you can't write that off. And there would be a couple little tweet exchanges about sound quality and all of that thing, but a companion was the word I was looking for. So, the other thing I wanted to ask you is, we see Apple Music take on, what was probably the streaming services, for classical, definitely up there. As we see that, I wonder if the idea of that companionship is as important to people. Do you think that is a prime factor when it comes to live terrestrial classical radio as opposed to the streaming?
Man, I sure hope so. I wanted to finish that thought about, backing out and looking at terrestrial radio and the threat of streaming and all that. To bring it back down to classical, Apple probably looked at this as its primary competition in that genre. And if they acquire it, sure, they can say, oh, well, we're going to get traffic from all these adjacent things in Apple's library, right? What happens if Apple decides the numbers aren't there? We're just going to choke this off.
Yeah, that's the risk, isn't it? And I hadn't thought about that. I wanted to read another part of this. It says Prime Phonic launched 3 years ago, and its team says this deal is about scale and reaching more listeners. Here's a quote: "As a classical-only startup, we cannot reach the majority of global classical listeners, especially those that listen to many other music genres as well. We therefore concluded that in order to achieve our mission, we need to partner with a leading streaming service that encompasses all music genres and also shares our love for classical music." So if we're getting that quote, I think honestly at the end of the day it was about some money or something. But let's take this quote from Prime Phonic. They're saying they feel like they can be more successful among other genres, or at least next to them.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that idea? Especially, again, public broadcast. A lot of these stations, public radio stations, are dual format. You know, that's how I learned public radio. But there are some that are all classical. I wonder if this should be a warning, or at least something for those institutions to think about.
So my question would be, what are the algorithms? What do you really gain from another genre or another adjacent sound bringing listeners your way? Is that what you're talking about?
I mean, it sounds like that's what they're talking about.
Okay, so we know the problem that Spotify has.
Mm-hmm.
So how are they going to... my question there would be, how do they address it?
Yeah,
how are they going to address that?
It's good. I just think it's interesting because we are seeing some community and public radio stations taking down those walls and mixing in a little bit of country or even a little bit of pop in with the Western classical. And a part of me just feels like this is a sign that is going to need to continue.
Sure, but is it going to give you that country song with some strings in the background and then steer you away from classical?
It depends on
in your randos.
Well, I think that question depends on who is in the room and how they're framing the idea of classical streaming. Because if I'm there, it's going to be one thing. But if it's elbow patches and whoever, it's going to be different.
So it remains to be seen. Let's give them a little while. They said the app is going to be up in 2022.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I would I'll
look at it then.
The main reason that I continued and continue to pay for Apple Music, I always let Dell do the Spotify account and we share it, but I pay for Apple Music because of the classical. I felt like I could find more and find things more accurately on Apple Music than on Spotify or the other streaming services. Now, I didn't specifically pay for Prime Phonic or any other specifically classical service because I also want to search other things, on the same thing and not want to have to skip the app. So maybe that's what they're getting at there. So shout out and all of that to everyone at Prime Phonic. As you say, we'll see what happens.
It'll be interesting. I mean, it certainly sounds like they're going into it with a lot of confidence.
Yeah. I wonder if we're going to see, I don't know. I sent a couple emails today. I'll leave it at that. If Apple is really getting into, and trying to prioritize classical, as, they allege, again, you say Apple saw Prime Phonic maybe as their primary competition, if any. So, there's that conversation. But if Apple is actually trying to get back, or I say back, but get into the classical, the so-called classical, I hope that there is someone there listening to TRILLOQUY and thinking about how awesome it would be to partner with us. I mean, you're not going to, TRILLOQUY is not being sold to Apple. It would be a partnership, but beyond just getting us on, the importance of an institution like Apple approaching and engaging classical music in a way that fits the 21st century, in a way that's equitable and in a way that's beyond Boccherini and all those folks, because it'll be so easy for Apple to fall into that. Yeah, they'll play the Samuel Coleridge-Taylor. They're sure to have the Randall Gooseby and the Connie Mason families on there. But I think we also need to talk about aesthetic, in the same way that genres are being mixed in other places as they're doing on Apple Music. I hope that they're including classical as they move forward with classical, I hope they're thinking about that and not considering classical music this kid that, needs to sit over here and practice your chess and read your books. No, he can go outside with the rest of everybody else and engage it like we do here on this podcast. That's all I'm saying. Now, if I see my sauce over there, if I see, TRILLOQUY or whatever they try to make up.
Right.
Could you imagine us getting into a fight with Apple? Anyway, we will see. We shall see, won't we? All right. Well, as we get into the second movement here, I wanted to shout out Donda. My pick in the second movement, as I'll get to, is from Kanye's new album, but and it's called Moon. I'm not going to play that right now. I'm going to play one called God Breathed. And this is what I want you to think about, Scott, as you listen to this, because I'm going to ask you. We talk about composers like Philip Glass, Steve Reich, the new music, the repetitiveness, the, avant-garde electronic music. We can get into Stockhausen and all of that, how we study that in the music theory books. When I heard this track from Kanye, God Breathed, for the first time, I instantly thought of that. I instantly thought of new music and what, these composers have been able to do. So let's listen to this, and I'm going to ask you a little question.
I know God breathed on this. 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 I know he got his hands on this. I know we got a chance on this. No, I never planned on this. I might need a band on this. This might get banned off rip. Gonna say something for y'all quick.
The repetition of that vocal from Kanye reminds me of a tune called Different Trains. And I think that's Reich. I think that's Steve Reich. And I know we've canceled him for whatever. But my point is, the question I want to ask, I feel like that has every ingredient of something that would be on even, something peripheral, a new music show, and an extra eclectic, something like that. I feel like all of the ingredients are there. It's electronic, but we have that repetition of rhythm. We have the repetition of vocals that, are making some sort of artistic point. I don't think this music is far from that arena, or at least should be treated far from that arena. Do you think I'm stretching by comparing what you just heard to new music as it's defined in the Western classical circles?
That track, yeah, I think that's stretching.
Really?
I do.
Really? Because I feel like, let's take out the vocals. That beat, with a violin on top of it, would certainly, be included in that music. Let's pretend Kanye wasn't on it, but the rest of the track was there. That single line doing that single bass line, doing that single rhythm. I feel like we're getting close to having to have that conversation. Maybe, you're saying I'm stretching, and I asked you the question, so that's your honest reaction. But I don't feel like we're far.
Let me ask you why. What about that makes you think it's not that far off?
Because again,
what do you hear in there that I'm not hearing?
I'm hearing again. We'll go back. I'm hearing. Let me press play here. So I'm hearing there's one thing happening right now. Okay. A repeated melody or a repeated bass, a passacaglia or whatever, if you will. This is not something that is foreign from classical, right? So just that much. That's something that I feel like you could hear on a new music track, some avant-garde thing written by insert composer yesterday. I don't feel like that would flag it as something not in those spaces, right? Or is that in itself outside of, the classical new music as you know it?
Are you saying if that was cast with instruments of an orchestra or a chamber group,
right? Or even let's even say one instrument. Let's say we heard that and we heard a flute or we heard a violin or something on top of that. Just those two things.
But you said that you didn't like to hear something being the escort or the window dressing.
Right. But that's not what I'm asking. I'm saying, is that not what new music is as we define it? We're only replacing an instrument with a voice.
Mm-hmm. I get what you're saying. I just, I don't hear it. I don't.
I need to. I wish I had prepared a tune to compare it to. Let me go to, and we're doing this line. I'm live. I'm gonna search different trains, and I think it's there it goes, Steve Reich. So let's listen to just a little bit of this. Now, you could easily have some rap on top of this, or some vocal or something. My point is, I don't see that sound as different at the end of the day than what we heard in that Kanye track. We're hearing electronics, we're hearing sound effects, we're hearing repeated rhythm. I don't understand what the difference is. That's the point I'm trying to make, or the question I'm asking. How far apart are those two pieces actually?
Are you going to put that on the Prime streaming show? Is that what you're talking about?
So you're trying to get me off the path here. I'm asking you, what is actually the difference between those two sounds? I don't think those two sounds are as far apart as we force them to be or make them out to be.
Fair. I don't. Speaking from a radio perspective, a music director has never given me that piece.
Sure.
And I know that they look at things in day parts. So
right.
I don't know, maybe late at night on a Friday or Saturday.
That's what I'm saying. In my question, I said, let's even consider the peripheral things, the specialty shows, the extra eclectic. I've heard this on extra eclectic, but before I came up here. So we know that Steve Reich, that aesthetic is accepted into these new music spaces. My point is, we need to get the Kanye there as well, because it's not actually different if you break down all of the ingredients. That's my point. That's all I'm saying there. I made that point today on social media, and there was some mixed reaction, and I just wanted to sort of flesh that out a little bit here so people can understand the point that I'm trying to make and the things I think about when we talk about decolonizing classical music and really breaking down genre. The ingredients are the same at the end of the day to me.
And you think God Breathes on This should be on a classical station?
Yes, absolutely. And that's that. Because it's not different at the end of the day. Even if you want to put it in the new music, in the avant-garde eclectic category, it belongs there because all of the same sounds and ingredients and tools are there.
I want to meet the music director that will make that happen.
I want to meet the music directors anyway, we're here in the second movement where we are taking the second ending. We take a tune that we've been repeating over and over all week and sort of give our breakdown of it and why we appreciate it. So I'm gonna start the second movement this week. So I've been listening to Kanye's new record. If you want to know all the news and drama and around that, you can go Google it. I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about the music itself. So there are a number of tracks on here that I really, 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 really appreciate. And one of them is one called Moon. Let's listen to a little bit of this here. We talk about, for the past couple weeks, we've been talking about the idea of like getting away and escape. With the Nas, we talked about going somewhere where nobody knows me, somewhere where I'm nobody. So that whole general theme, I hear that when I listen to this track, because of course the lyrics there, I want to go to the moon, and when you put it into context and think about what Kanye is thinking about, the loss of his mother, the collapse of his marriage, his mental issues, just wanting to go to the moon and wanting to escape. In the midst of all of the other sounds that are on that album, it's just a moment of pause and sort of all of the noise, all of the news headlines, all of the videos of me in Donald Trump's office at the White House, all of that. We have that, and we have this moment where you get to just see and hear a Kanye West who is like the rest of us and probably sits around like many of us do oftentimes saying, damn, I wish I could just go somewhere where I don't have to talk, where I don't have to be in the public, where nobody knows me. That's a feeling that many of us have. And I heard that feeling coming out in that song. Additionally, to the point I was just making about that other track, the song starts with, vocals, and it gets into that electric guitar. Okay, say what you want about the electric guitar in Western classical spaces. Let's turn it into an acoustic guitar. That is not different than some of the things that we allow in. And yes, Kanye comes is rapping on top of that a little later in the track. But again, when I hear this music, I hear music that we have to start to consider and actually ask ourselves the question, why is this not allowed in classical spaces? For folks who know a little bit about the latter part of Kanye's journey, he's really gotten into spirituality. His last album, Jesus is King, was very much Christian based and driven as this album is. So, we can talk about how, that Black spiritual experience and its connection to, all the way back down to the Negro spiritual and what that means for an American view of classical music. All of these things are running around in my mind. And like I said, I think the day is coming where we're going to have to seriously consider why these aesthetics are, not allowed inside of certain spaces, despite the fact that all of the ingredients are exactly the same.
You hit on something. I don't have any of Kanye's albums. I don't know if I've heard any of his songs all the way through. Mm-hmm. Maybe I have when I was listening with you. That's not me. That's not the music that I gravitate to. And
sure.
When I do, it's not Kanye. So you talked about knowing all the context and having all the background and everything that he's been through. That's missing for me, and so it didn't resonate. So I didn't hear anything there. Now, if you want to talk about one of the problems that I think you're going to run into by including that as it is on a station where they play classical music is all of the baggage that goes around just with that word classical music.
Mm-hmm.
That's first, because if you are advertising yourself as a classical station out there, or people are looking for you because they're looking for an orchestra or a piano or something like that, they're looking for Mozart or whatever. If they go and they hear Kanye, they're going to go, whoops, wrong station. So is this an instance where you think Apple taking over, what was it, Prime Phonic is that excuse me, is that the first iteration of some sort of sound that you're thinking of? Because I don't hear it.
It's definitely something that I will put into those spaces, certainly in radio programming. But I'm going to go back to this article that we were reading where the man was talking about Fela Sowande's music. He says, again, it's not a profound score, but it's an accomplished and enjoyable one. So like it is what it is. I don't, as you say, I don't gravitate to it, but it's fine. Let me, play a little bit more of this and tell me about just the general aesthetic of the music, how offensive it is, how it's something that, I don't know. This reminds me of music that you have shared with me, just the general aesthetic of it. We're hearing vocals, we're hearing electric guitar. You can't tell me that there aren't pieces that are vocal and electric guitar that you don't like. So when I hear people say you don't gravitate to it, or you don't hear anything there, I feel like it's the baggage of who Kanye West is that is attached to that opinion.
Maybe, but all I'm saying is that I couldn't even, I wouldn't even been able to tell you that was Kanye's voice.
Sure. Well, no, that was his feature, but we're talking about Kanye as this music creator. There are two samples on this whole album, and one of them is a Lauryn Hill sample. So the vast majority of this music, this piece included, is something that came from nothing. So, again, that's also what I think about when we talk about new music and accepting this music as a part of that. It's just the soapbox I get on. So I would invite everyone to just put your bullshit about Kanye to the side, for a second and listen to something new in the same way that you would check out, I'm especially talking to the new music people. I've been in those spaces lately. So the folks who listen to Angelica Negron and all of these, incredible composers who are really stretching the limits today, Caroline Shaw, all of that stuff. If you're going to, take some time to check that out, take some time to see, if there's something that you enjoy here, because at the end of the day, I don't think it's all that different. The other point, but before I end my little thing here, that I wanted to say is that, Kanye is bringing listeners to the general aesthetic of church, even those of us who are not Christian. I am nobody's Christian. Everybody knows that. But I can really enjoy this music despite the fact that the themes of it and the general idea of it is religious. I feel like that's something that classical is failing to do right now. That aesthetic of a concert hall, that aesthetic of an opera house is still so foreign to so many people, or maybe even so unattractive to so many people. The music isn't bringing them in the way that Kanye is bringing all of these people to something religious. That's another a parallel that I'm drawing as I've been listening to his music. So those are my things on Kanye. So go listen to Donda. This is not an ad. I just think it's some really great music. What you got? What you got this week?
I feel like I should pass after all that because, looking at what Kalena was playing at the BBC Proms, reading some of these articles that I ran across in the past week, I just went right back to Samuel Coleridge-Taylor and an overture that I had not heard, which was the overture to Hiawatha's Wedding Feast. And I heard a Naxos recording of it. There's some old grainy ones that you can get that are probably, from the 50s or 40s.
And really, it's a good thing that the music was recorded in the first place, because a lot of these things still don't have the professional recordings.
Well, yeah, and that article that I cited brought up a few composers that are, their music has been found and is being recorded after they're sort of reassembled. Mm-hmm. But Hiawatha's Wedding Feast, I guess there are some British-ish things about it, but as I was listening, there were so many heroic moments. The way that he used the brass in particular, there were some fanfares that really sort of made the hair on my arms stand up, when it hit just right. Yeah. But also, when Samuel was about, he would have had to have been 15 or 20 years old, somewhere in that range, silent movies were out.
Sure.
And there was a whole reduction of an orchestral score put down into a piano to go along with it.
Yeah.
And there were moments in it that had me feeling like I was in a theater and there was somebody that was playing the music to go along with some action on the screen.
He gave you the picture of it. The scent.
He gave me the
scent of it.
The scent of being in a silent movie theater.
Yeah.
It was kind of cool. But another thing that struck me about this was that he had no idea how big this music was going to be.
Sure.
So he sold it outright for 15 guineas.
Oh, 15 guineas. I wonder what that is in modern day.
I figured it out.
Did you get it? Okay.
About $4,200.
So that's a little bit of money, but not as much as...
No. So not as much as it's been played and recorded and such. And the reason for that, after his death, when he died, the fact that his family received no royalties from all of its success for about 50 years.
I can't.
That is what caused the formation of the Performing Rights Society.
They had to do a whole group of people, a whole society, to get him his coins, and he was dead, so his family.
And so
I wonder if he has living
musicians and
ancestors.
composers are benefiting from that today.
Well, let's take a listen to a little bit of this Hiawatha. I appreciate that harp. I think we hear a lot of harp in Samuel Coleridge-Taylor's music. I think that's really beautiful. And yeah, just again, he had a different sort of struggle as an Afro-Englishman, but made his way up. Maybe a few weeks back, I think I brought up the fact that he made his way to the White House. Something that I think is important to understand about Samuel Coleridge-Taylor, not just as a composer, but as a historical figure. He cared about the diaspora. He was, we talk about Garvey and Pan-Africanism, all the time. But Samuel Coleridge-Taylor was also thinking along those lines. So, when Black Americans weren't being treated right, fighting for civil rights and all that in the early 20th century, he was over here. He believed in that. And I think there's really something to note there today. Okay, see, we getting into the TRILLOQUY, and this is not what I was going to talk about in the fourth movement, but what I'm thinking about, we have so many Black folks out here, especially some of these Black conductors who love sitting, in these orchestras and doing these things in these predominantly white institutions, but never turn around and actually do anything for Black people. And I think the further we get along, the more that is being named, especially in the opera world. No shade. I'm not subtweeting anybody, but my point is Samuel Coleridge-Taylor was not one of those people. He was someone who made his way in whatever, with 15 guineas and whatever else,
I should say
into those spaces, but he cared. He was always looking back and looking ahead and thinking about Black people. That's all, I just want to make sure that's stated.
I don't know how much 15 guineas was back in the day. Today, it would be about $4,200.
Well, I mean, $4,200 sounds all right.
Right, but I think in his time it was like the equivalent of getting like $50, 50
really?
pounds.
So it wasn't even anything.
Well,
wow.
I don't know because I wasn't around then.
Sure. Yeah, well, I mean, shout out to Samuel Coleridge-Taylor. There was a point where I would forego the music of Samuel Coleridge-Taylor for the sake of, other Black composers or other women composers with a more contemporary sound. Again, where we talk about aesthetics and how we need to always, clean the dust out of the corners and take the conversation a little bit further. So, I still affirm that we need to shift the aesthetic that we automatically think about when we talk about classical music, and even classical music by Black composers. And that's really beautiful music. There's no denying that.
It's another entry point into a Black composer's work. So.
Yeah. Well, offering many entry points, not only into the music by Black composers and other marginalized composers, but some of the so-called traditional repertoire is the Du Bois Orchestra. This week, I'm privileged to have Dominque Hoskin, the artistic director of the Du Bois Orchestra, and Joe LaRocca, the executive director of the Du Bois Orchestra, join me in the third movement. Of course, the Du Bois Orchestra named after W.E.B. Du Bois, the great Black author and thinker who famously affirmed the work of Wagner. So what we sort of talk about in this in this interview, in this conversation, is the idea of taking a step back and matching the more traditional sounds from the diaspora with some of the more traditional canon. I'm always about pushing the needle and let's get new sounds. There are also folks out there with Black history and Black people as the foundation exploring the same thing, but in some of that more Western European aesthetic. So I thought I would give that conversation and that idea, a bit of a platform here on TRILLOQUY. The Du Bois Orchestra is affiliated with Harvard, I believe. And if it's not Harvard, if it's another Ivy League, we talk about it in the interview. Sorry, I'm not remembering. But, we talk about how that can sort of feed into the elitism of it all and the ways in which they sort of combat that. I'll read: the mission of the Du Bois Orchestra is to overcome social exclusion by elevating underrepresented voices in classical music through high-quality musical performance, education, and community engagement. So, again, they're not doing it the way I like to do it, but they're doing it, and it's important work. So we're going to hear from both Dominque and Joe to get us into this conversation. Well, first I'll say, we start the conversation out by talking about the other work that they do and why they maintain some dedication to the Western classical repertoire. Dominque, the conductor, is an aerospace engineer, and Joe plays Broadway shows. So they have a lot of work outside of talking about, Wagner and Samuel Coleridge-Taylor and all these folks, and they are dedicated to it. So we start by talking about that a little bit. But to get us into the conversation, I wanted to play a little bit of another work by Samuel Coleridge-Taylor. This is the ending of the fourth movement of his Petite Suite de Concert, a piece that the Du Bois Orchestra has mastered in their performances of it. So here's a little bit of this Samuel Coleridge-Taylor, and here is my conversation with Joe LaRocca and Dominque Hoskin.
I make my living in musical theater. I'm actually going to be returning to my normal job on the Jesus Christ Superstar National Tour, which is a great job. My primary instruments are flute and piccolo, but I also play pretty much every other woodwind. And I always say except for bassoon, because that's one of those. Yeah, exactly. I don't even, it's funny because the bassoon's fingering system is so convoluted. I don't even call it a fingering system. I call it a thumbing system. And so I'm just like, I can't even come close to getting to a professional level on this, but I do play, pretty much every other woodwind. I even play some early winds. I did some recent recording some music by Frederick the Great and Bach and Leclerc on traverso flute, which is a, nice little project to do. And I have a Quantz flute coming in the mail. So it's a flute that was designed by Quantz. And I want to sort of play more Frederick the Great's music because he's, and not an underrepresented person, but I think underrepresented he's overshadowed by Quantz, his court musician. Anyway, so I won't dig too deep into the weeds on that one. But what made me sort of stick around with the orchestral world is, for one, I just love orchestral music. It has kind of an emotional depth that's hard to find anywhere else. And I'm just in love with it. Really, it's simply put. And but really deeper than that, I mean, I probably would have just put it aside if it weren't for Du Bois as an organization. I was around with the organization since the second year in 2016. I was personnel director just because I was starting to bring my friends from school in. And that was more active recruiting than anyone was able to do. So for a new orchestra that was volunteer. And at the time, it was the Du Bois Orchestra at Harvard, which we since stripped that title and become just the Du Bois Orchestra. And I just kind of stuck around because I wanted to help out with I was becoming a little bit jaded by the classical world, like a lot of people. Oftentimes when we talk about social justice within classical music, people think, oh, well, why even bother with classical music? It's so, such an exclusive club for the upper crust of society and stuff like that, which I think is changing, and it shows in the numbers. And so I really think that I didn't want to abandon Du Bois, and I wanted to stick around. And people, a lot of the senior members within the organization coming into COVID, and when we were like smack in the middle of COVID 1 year ago exactly, kind of got together and kind of said, hey, do you want to help us run this thing? And I was in a unique position in that my unemployment was fine. And
yep.
So, and I didn't have any other opportunities to work considering my job. I need 2,000 to 3,000 people to be able to congregate in a place in order to work. So I thought, hey, I have the time and the will to do it. So let's make this thing happen.
Yeah. Dominque, what about you? I mean, you're an aerospace engineer. Why bother with a baton and a podium and orchestral music?
Yeah, so I'm a PhD candidate at MIT. Hopefully I'll be finishing up pretty soon. I'd say the short answer to your question is that there are things that music gives me that my research can't. I mean, I love my research. I've wanted to be an aerospace engineer since I was a little kid, and this is not true of all people in my profession, but what I do is pretty much me sitting down at a computer writing code, it's really cool. It's really intellectually challenging, but certainly the community aspect is the thing that I just could not give up about music. And then just classical music is one of many very robust languages for artistic and emotional expression. Mm-hmm. And it's just such a privilege to be part of a music making experience with such high level musicians. So I think that's really, for me, it just adds something, an aspect to my life that I just don't get from my research alone.
Sure. Despite those differences, sitting in front of a computer is very different than standing in front of an orchestra. So, despite the obvious differences, are there any overlaps? Are there conversations or issues happening in aerospace engineering that you're able to apply to orchestral music or even the Du Bois Orchestra specifically?
Well, the first thing that I think of, funny enough, is that sound is very important in both professions. Particularly the research I do is on like high speed flow. So where sonic boom, things like that are
Okay.
very important. So that's one thing. And then, yeah, in terms of the connection between them, I guess it is pretty kind of left brain, right brain sort of thing. But I think there is an artistic aspect of my research and writing code. And when I'm faced with an engineering problem, and I'm trying to find the solution, sometimes there are many different ways you could solve it, but trying to find the most optimal or the most elegant way is really quite an artistic endeavor sometimes. So
Okay, that's interesting. Joe, you already sort of spoke to stripping the name Harvard from the official title of the orchestra. I think about your mission of overcoming social exclusion. There must be lots of conversations there as far as being Harvard affiliated at all, in name or not, being pretty exclusive in itself. How do you deal with that reality next to the mission of the Du Bois Orchestra?
Well, I struggle to start talking about it just because there's so many places to start.
Yeah.
We've had this conversation a lot because two people on our board, on our advisory board, who are the founders, Kai Polzhofer, who was a PhD student at Harvard in composition, and then Karen Cueva, who was in the ed school, who now works at Carnegie Hall, are constantly in my ear about just everything that goes on in the orchestra. Again, advisory board, right?
Yeah.
And it was tough kind of selling the idea of stripping the Harvard name away. And I wanted to do that because, for one thing, I want us to be our own organization, right? And not even have the perception of sort of being financially dependent on Harvard or being a Harvard student group. Because when you have the name Harvard on you, it makes it seem like you're a student group, because Harvard has like 6 orchestras. It's insane. And really, it was at first, it was more of a pragmatic recruiting thing. Because I was personnel director, I was doing most of the active recruiting. And when people see at Harvard, they're like, oh, well, this thing doesn't really have legs to be a professional organization. So we really came to that balance of saying, by virtue of the fact that we were the Du Bois Orchestra at Harvard, and that we were founded by Harvard students, and that we're in Cambridge, playing in the middle of Harvard Square with the name of Du Bois, people assume the Harvard affiliation. Now, one of the things I like about having, there's a positive and a negative side, right? So I'll start with the negative side of the Harvard affiliation is, one, Harvard is probably the most exclusive place in the world. It's pretty much a Harry Potter fantasy camp for rich people's kids.
Sure.
Disclaimer, there's a lot of brilliant people there who really earn their way in, but in a school with 30 to 40% legacy admissions, I mean, come on.
Yeah.
So it is like an exclusive thing in that way. And a lot of people, when they affiliate us with Harvard, we have that kind of negative attention drawn to us. However, what I think is that it's important to attack the belly of the beast. And in a lot of ways, the classical world is inexorably tied with the Ivy League, right? Because, a lot of the orchestras, who happen to be the first to, or the biggest to have the name of the city attached to them, have major donors who are just very, very wealthy people, especially in New England, right? And a lot of those people are tied with the Ivy League in some way, right? So there's that connection. So in order for us to really, I think, fight the battle in the belly of the beast, then it's good that we're embedded in Harvard, because as one of our board members one of our administrators, Aaron Benavides, said to me, like, Harvard needs us. because he is still at Harvard as a PhD student in sociology. And he talks about some of the students, like freshman students that he deals with and teaches and tutors and stuff like that, and talks about some of the horrible things that they deal with as people of color, especially. And, because often, he is a sort of earpiece for them and a shoulder to cry on, being a person of color that's, a PhD candidate.
Yeah.
And so I think about them, when it comes to being sort of embedded in Harvard. And I think that us gaining prestige as sort of being attached to Harvard and sort of Harvard taking more notice of us as time goes by will really be a win in sort of our mission.
Yeah. I want to speak to, specific techniques, strategies, toward this, again, this larger mission of, getting away from that exclusivity, bringing communities together. But I wonder if either of you could speak to the significance of the name W.E.B. Du Bois when it comes to this ensemble. I mean, there are lots of very famous and very significant graduates of Harvard and all of these Ivy League schools. Why Du Bois? Why was his name chosen?
Well, I think he was one of the first, if not the first, if I'm not mistaken. And I think even more importantly, he was a lover of classical music.
Okay.
So I think he was great friends with Samuel Coleridge-Taylor. He happened to love the music of Wagner, I believe, as well. So I think he's a great icon to hold up as a patron of the arts, but that's also very obviously interrelated with our mission.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Joe, when it comes to the cross pollination that we saw with Du Bois and all of these other folks, I wonder if we're seeing any of that now. Is the spirit of cross arts collaboration alive in this project with this orchestra?
Sure, I think that's one of those things that we're kind of gearing toward for the future in terms of cross collaboration in art forms. It's interesting because one of the things we were talking about doing as we were coming out of COVID, because we spent our time as basically like a volunteer, essentially community style orchestra, right? Like we don't have a 501c3. We're all just kind of, getting just enough donations to be able to rent the music and, compensate some, like a harpist or something like that if we need them, if we're getting like overly ambitious, or to have cartage for percussionists and stuff like that. So really, while we had a lot of these ideas, the resources kind of weren't there. Now, coming out of COVID, we are starting to be able to gather enough resources to be able to do things like cross collaboration in art forms and in different kinds of musical forms. And a million ideas are there, and everybody's just kind of sparking with enthusiasm on this. But one of the things I had to do as executive director is step in and say, okay, let's do what we were doing first and do it successfully for a year, and then let's start to talk about these things. But yeah, I mean, in terms of that, I mean, I've been a big proponent of that in my own recitals. I've always tried to get visual artists to make some kind of not just images on a projector screen, but like putting different images on different surfaces and in the halls that I was performing in, and original visual art with like Bach, but also with like Miguel del Aguila and things like that, and programming those things together. And so I come in with the sort of artistic spirit of that. And so a lot of those ideas are there, but it's just going to come with resources.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the W word was said a couple minutes ago, Wagner. So I want to go there. I actually featured Paul Festa several weeks back, and he talks a lot about reappreciating Wagner and really seeing how significant he was to world culture, just beyond, opera, beyond the orchestral stages. In that research, he included Du Bois's appreciation for Wagner, and that was something that I was actually pretty surprised to see. I had never heard that story. With that appreciation of Wagner considered, is that justification enough? What are the conversations surrounding platforming the music of Wagner specifically, as opposed to, the many other Black composers who aren't being given that moment when Wagner is? Has that been a conversation? Or have people pushed or challenged you, when it comes to that specifically?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. One of the nice things about this orchestra is, we can do both, right? So if we so choose, kind of my official position is that while I certainly do not want to over represent music of Wagner, certainly, and we happen to not have any Wagner coming up on this year's concert cycle, I wouldn't say
Bravo.
that we would never perform his works, especially considering that W.E.B. Du Bois was indeed a patron of his. But I think the key is, if you're going to perform Wagner, it's important to think critically about it and to make sure that you're honest about what his views were and what are the positive and the negative impacts that he had on the world. So I think it's to present both sides proportionally, right? To not give a one-sided, overly charitable view of Wagner.
Yeah, even beyond Wagner, just the more so-called traditional repertoire. Joe, why do we need it at all? What's the significance of platforming some of the works that folks know, not only the Wagner, but the Beethoven and so many others?
Well, I think this is what you're touching on, is kind of highlighting what makes the Du Bois Orchestra's mission kind of special in this time where a lot of people are starting to program, especially Black composers and women composers in this time, especially in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement and stuff like that. And a lot of great social justice initiatives going on within the greater society, and orchestras are responding to that. Now, the important thing to us is really canonizing works by underrepresented composers. And the way we believe to do that is, one, not just limiting Black composers to February, not just limiting underrepresented composers to special pops concerts, alongside Harry Potter or something like that. Not putting it off to the assistant conductor. What we're doing is taking these works and programming them right alongside the canon, right? So we're going to do Florence Price programmed right next to Haydn. We've done Beethoven next to Samuel Coleridge-Taylor. To us, this is really the important thing, is to have it in our core programming, our regular programming, and to do it without, and hopefully at one point, it won't be a big deal. People look back at it and say, like, oh, this is what people have been doing forever. That's kind of our mission, right? And so then, as time goes forward, we might have to stretch our mission to say, oh, okay, well, now we're going to start doing these special cross-art collaborations, like things that symphonies really need to do to really keep up with the times and sort of appeal to a younger audience in a way that isn't just saying, like, you better appreciate us because, this is what culture is. And if you don't like it, you're not educated enough or not cultured enough, right?
Yep. Are there challenges in getting the music itself that folks don't see or don't typically think about? I feel like, there's a website that you can go to for almost anything from, 18th, 19th century, just print out all the parts. We know that you can't do that for, folks like Florence Price. What are the challenges in actually platforming the music, the specifics when it comes to rentals or parts or all that sort of thing?
I'll let you take this one, Dom.
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. So there's this great website called IMSLP that you can get anything in the public domain on, or most things, for free, and it's basically open source. But the problem is, in the U.S., music copyright law is rather long. It's death of the composer plus
70 years, I think.
70, yeah. It's a very, very long time, and so I honestly think half the reason why a lot of this music, which is great music, is so underperformed is because it is so hard to get. Usually one rental company has basically the exclusive rights to all of a given composer's estate, and you have to go through them to get the music. And one of the most challenging thing for me, in addition to the price and having to the delay time and actually getting the music, is a lot of the rental companies won't actually sell you the score. And as the conductor, we put a lot of work into our score study and marking the scores and making sure everything is just right for the rehearsals and the performance. And so definitely not being able to keep that work is something that's really disappointing. and it also just, it presents an additional challenge that I'm very much looking forward to. I think it's going to help me grow as a conductor, and I think it's going to help all of our players grow as musicians. But it's definitely not easy.
So how does that manifest when it comes to preparation? I'm sure you own, Beethoven scores and have your own particular markings and that sort of thing. How do you overcome the challenge as far as preparation when it comes to not being able to own the scores to some of this underrepresented music?
Yeah, it's really tricky, and it's something that I am just now kind of in the beginning stages of learning how to deal with. But I think the key for me would be just getting myself to the point where I can go through a score in a week and be, ready for the first rehearsal. And that's a very daunting task as a young conductor. But again, I think it's just really the speed of preparation, and then also being able to have a complete musical vision, just looking at my head or looking inward, by reading the score, as opposed to being able to listen to 15 different recordings of the piece. So I think really those two things, the speed of preparation and not having as many reference recordings to go back to, is what makes it especially challenging.
Yeah. Joe, I wonder how you have seen this specific, challenge of actually getting the music manifest within the body of musicians and in the rehearsal process. I mean, does it is more time spent rehearsing, again, a Florence Price piece as opposed to Beethoven 7 that most of us know? How does that manifest?
It's really interesting because I think one of our challenges in the very beginning was the fact that our conductors knew more about the canonical works meant that we spent more time on them because they could hear it better. They knew what they wanted in their head more than with something they've never heard before, or something that there's only a couple recordings of there or none out there. And so that became a challenge. And luckily, there were a lot of mouthpieces within the orchestra who were very much able to come out and say, hey, I noticed that we're only spending 15 minutes on this piece where we spent 45 minutes on Beethoven or something like that. And that was something that was actually, to our first conductor's credit, they were able to make those shifts, right? And know that there was that bias within themselves and make that change. But it's interesting though, because I think that oftentimes musicians really take to a lot of underrepresented composers, especially American underrepresented composers, a lot easier than even works that they know really well, because they get very excited about it, and it speaks more to, like, you can hear things that are very American. For example, in Florence Price's music, we played like Mississippi River Suite and people took to it like a duck in water. And we really didn't have to spend that much time on it except on some technical things. But even then, the technical things people were able to overcome really well, more than something that they felt like was a little more tedious, like a Schumann or something like that.
Sure. What does the orchestra look like? I mean, I wonder if either of you can speak to, any intentionality behind making sure the orchestra looks as diverse as, you're wanting it to sound programmatically.
So my thoughts on that are, I think the best way to increase representation, really in any group, but in an orchestra especially, is to make the environment such that the people that you want to join would be attracted to the group. And so we're actually right in the midst of our audition process. And I think I've certainly been very pleased with the diversity amongst the musicians that are trying out for this group. And shifting to a paid model certainly helps with that. It gets more people attracted. And so I think, the bigger your pool of recruiting is, the more active recruiting you do, and the better experience you have, the easier it is to attract a more diverse crowd.
Yeah. So who are you? You talk about, the folks who you want to be in the group, attracting those people. Who are those musicians? Is it okay to have student musicians? Are you specifically targeting freelancers? Who is the target Du Bois Orchestra member?
Oh, go ahead, Joe.
No, you could go. I just want to speak to that because I was personnel director before executive director, and I'm still pretty much personnel director right now in terms of doing the recruiting. And really, I mean, we've gotten some people who, for example, there was, oh God, I don't want to say their name because they're not like, they've already auditioned, but they're not in the orchestra yet because we have other people to audition. But it was a person who was doing a series about wanting to canonize Black composers and just talking about Black composers. And so it was just a person I reached out to and actively recruited and said, hey, would you like to audition for us, right? So that's an example of the sort of kind of person, because that's clearly somebody who's going to want to be involved in the mission, right? While we've kind of shied away from having like interview questions within the process, certainly that kind of active recruiting is one way of doing that. And that's the kind of sort of person we've been reaching out to. But one strategy, like concrete strategy we implemented in terms of having a more passive, organic sort of messaging to say like, hey, people who are, to sort of increase diversity and people interested in the mission and things like that, was by our concert in June and sort of having, and that one wasn't auditioned. That was like taking sort of half of members that we already had and half members that are going to be brand new and just actively recruiting and saying like, do you want to play this one concert? By the way, we're going to be re-auditioning everybody because we have a new director and everything like that. But, we played a Joseph Bologna piece, which was, symbolic in the fact that, for one, the Joseph Bologna is a lot easier to get than a lot of, Black composers, just because it's so old and in the public domain. And also we played it very first. We wanted it to be the very first thing that we played coming out of COVID. And it was one of the things we took the most seriously. It was his 2 symphonies, right? And then we programmed that alongside Aaron Copland and Holst. And what was the third one or the fourth one, Tom? Yeah, Bartok, right. And we also wanted it to be a good experience for people, just because the best recruiting is word of mouth from people who are already there, right? And so we, just tried to, make it a positive artistic environment, and also saying within our recruiting and our audition page, like, not just that all are encouraged to apply, or that people, BIPOC people and LGBTQ are encouraged to apply. It was more of coming up with a statement and saying like, we, acknowledge that there is, marginalization of all these kinds of groups, and therefore all are encouraged to apply. That, and that I'm kind of butchering the wording a little bit, but I think that also kind of gave people a sense of like, oh, that's not just the copy and paste statement that all these organizations use to try to seem, diverse and, or like not racist or sexist or homophobic, right? So I think that also helped. So that's the short answer.
And Dominique, I asked that question, again, who you want in the orchestra or recruiting techniques while thinking about that mission, overcoming social exclusion. I mean, what defines an orchestra is, is exclusive in itself in many ways. I mean, you can't have 20 flutes on stage. You have to exclude someone. So your thoughts on that, just recruiting and putting intention behind diversity.
Yeah. So one thing that I wanted to mention before, because you asked a question about what does the orchestra look like in terms of like where are people from and things like that. So I'd say that like most of our musicians fall into 2 groups. So we have a lot of kind of young conservatory grads or even conservatory students that are kind of young gigging musicians, and they're really trying to make their instrument their livelihood. Yeah. But then there are folks like me that are just kind of really good amateurs, that have day jobs. And I think having pretty equal representation in both camps makes this a fairly unique orchestra. And I think that's one thing, certainly for me personally, one way I describe it is that I was personally privileged enough to be exposed to classical music, but not privileged enough to be kind of groomed to be a classical musician. So having an orchestra that's open and welcoming to folks that aren't using their instrument as their livelihood, I think really helps broaden the range of people that we can get to play in our orchestra. Yeah. And another thing we do is we allow people to upload their resume if they would like, but we don't absolutely require it. And we don't, if they upload it, we'll take a look at it. But again, we're certainly not resting our decisions based solely on their credentials. It's mostly, this is one of the reasons why we were so adamant about actually doing in-person auditions, even though very few orchestras are really going through that trouble right out of post, because we really want a fair process to be able to evaluate folks. And yeah, these are some really hard decisions. Getting to your second questions, there are definitely going to be some hard decisions because certain instruments, particularly the wind instruments, we've got lots of really talented, qualified musicians that really, really, really want to play. So, to tie this in with another one of your questions, I think this is one of the reasons why the canon is important, because a lot of those works do have very tall scores with lots of instruments and allow us to include more people. But yeah, there are definitely going to be some hard decisions, and we'll have to, again, think really deeply about how we want to divide these limited number of parts. But again, our goal is to really make this experience something that lots of different people find attractive, and then be as fair and equitable as possible about choosing who ultimately plays in our orchestra.
Yeah. The orchestral world is still mourning the loss of Michael Morgan, and something that I'm thinking about when I think about his legacy, especially over on the West Coast conducting orchestras, was a purpose of an orchestra going beyond just the music, but making the community a better place, impacting the community. I did see that the Du Bois Orchestra has a relationship with the Boston Juvenile Justice System, and just reaching beyond the orchestral stage. How is the Du Bois Orchestra really having that positive impact beyond just audiences getting to hear some beautiful music?
Yeah, so I can speak to that certainly. That project was a really interesting project, and I wish we could have expanded it more, but that was one of those things that there was just a huge personnel shift, at that time. Pretty much completely a different administration than what we have now. So we kind of lost contact with that a little bit, and then of course COVID. But one of the things that we're trying to do is emphasize not only sort of educational initiatives in terms of like group lessons and stuff like that, but real concrete individual mentorship. Because in our one of our board members, Ian Saunders, I've had many conversations with him about this. And that's kind of the conclusion we came to, that's the best course of action in terms of helping people from marginalized communities really succeed in this world. Now, it's interesting because we've also had the conversation about, sort of these kind of educational initiatives often focus on solely music, right? And sort of trying to, teach kids how to, be excellent musicians. And we talked about sort of the motivation behind that, right? And sometimes the motivation is like, oh, well, we want to create the next crop of soloists and excellent symphony musicians, which, as we know, is probably 99% of people just don't have a career as performers. That's just the reality. And that's, that's just how it is nowadays. And that's what we have to work with. And so one of the things that Dominique and I had talked about is this idea, or, multiple people in the organizations, but namely Dominique, is sort of having this individual mentorship with the motivation of giving people from these marginalized communities the same opportunities, or at least as close to similar opportunities as people, from wealthy communities have, in terms of being able to compete to get into these better schools and have better careers and stuff like that, for whatever you want to call, for what that is. So music, and also just music as a way of just bettering humanity, right? If we're really going to get down to it on a philosophical level. So what we're planning to do is sort of find an organization to latch onto, since we don't really have the money right now to make these kinds of things happen, and provide our people, our musicians, to kind of volunteer, and then, later on find funding to, make these sort of individual mentorship programs happen, whether it be like through a bunch of lessons and, things like that.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate the clarification of the word "better"
Right.
because again, when we talk when we're talking about overcoming exclusive sort of paradigms, I think that's an important thing to do. I have one more question that I'll throw out, but before I do that, how can people learn more about the Du Bois Orchestra and how can they support the Du Bois Orchestra?
Yeah, so you can come to our website, duboisorchestra.org, where we actually have our GoFundMe on the front page, which we just started a couple weeks ago. So you can support us through there. With that money, we just started being able to pay musicians through a grant from Cambridge Arts Foundation, and we're also starting to really dig into some individual donors. So we've been able to pay small honorarium to our musicians, but this is coming from being a volunteer orchestra. So, so even a donation of, $80 would take care of one musician for an entire cycle. So that GoFundMe is on there. And the interesting thing, though, we've been finding is that, there are some, I'll tell you a little story about our GoFundMe. So we put it up and we've had some donations and it's been doing pretty well just from audience members and stuff like that. But from people who've never heard about it, we've had some interesting feedback. I actually had a message from somebody because apparently you can message somebody who is running a GoFundMe. And it said, I would have donated if not for this woke BS. So tiresome is what they said. And so I thought that was very interesting because not only did he take the time to read through it and not donate, but he also took the time to message me about it. And so I thought, this is actually evidence that what we're doing is really important, right? And so, I'm very, it makes me even more motivated, because if you don't have haters, you're not doing something right. So
That's right.
So that's how you can,
Yeah.
that's how you can do it.
Yeah. Well, we couldn't honor Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois, without reading some of his prose. So I did find a quote that I wanted to bring in. He said, "If the slave went free, stood a brief moment in the sun, then moved again towards slavery." He's, of course, referring to Reconstruction era America and how things sort of got derailed. But I think about that when it comes to orchestral music, orchestral spaces, highlighting marginalized composers. And I'll start with you, Dominique. What's protecting orchestral spaces, so-called classical spaces, from returning to centering the Beethoven and the Wagner and all those folks, instead of doing the extra legwork of renting these scores from these more diverse composers and really making that the norm moving forward?
Yeah, it's a very good point. So I think for us, one of the reasons why I was very attracted to this position when it was offered to me was the fact that this orchestra has really been ahead of the curve on it since it was founded in 2015, 2016. So before this type of I guess diversity initiative really took root, this orchestra has been very consistent in its programming and its message, and that's something that makes me feel a lot more comfortable being a part of the team than I would have if this orchestra had started in, say, 2019. So I think, unfortunately, you're probably going to see a lot of other groups though that have recently we won't name names, but we've even had some issues of plagiarism of some of our mission, and it's
Wow.
we think very deeply about what we say and how it's worded so that it can be the most inclusive, so we can say what we want to say in the most inclusive and acceptable way possible. It usually doesn't look like the same email that everybody who works at a corporation gets, and so it's pretty obvious when somebody tries to copy us. And so we do see things like that where people are just trying to win some brownie points, to boost whatever it is their real purpose is. But for our orchestra, underrepresented composers and programming them alongside canon is really at the core of our mission. And so for us, that's not going anywhere.
So to that, Joe, what's the big picture for the Du Bois Orchestra 20 years down the line? What do you hope to see in the general ecosystem that the Du Bois Orchestra has helped put in motion?
20 years from now, geez, I'm trying to think about 1 year from now, Garrett.
Sure. Yeah. That's a good point.
I really hope to see 20 years from now, at least where we are, to have what our mission is now sort of not be special, that it's really common practice, because, these composers are undoubtedly excellent. I mean, I think of Florence Price as an example. I often call her our Beethoven, because that's the amount we're going to repeat her works, because it's just excellent. There's no other way around it. We're not just checking off a box or two boxes by programming Florence Price, considering she's Black and a woman. That's not our motivation. Our motivation is to play it, obviously because she's underrepresented, but because it's excellent music, right? And so I really hope that people continue on this path of programming those works, programming them alongside the canon, and that we actually have to shift our thinking in order to stay more relevant, but also just sort of be hopefully held up as one of the pioneers of this movement, and also that more people my age or around there feel good about going to see classical music. And I think that extends beyond just, programming underrepresented composers and doing pops concerts and things like that. There has to be some real fundamental change. Again, in terms of what we talked about with cross arts collaborations and things like that, just making the symphonic experience a more interesting one to people who've grown up with excellent art, bombarded with amazing art, and sometimes not amazing art, but just a lot of art, like TV and music, and more than any other time in history. And so in order to keep the attention of people who've grown up like that, more things need to happen. And I think there's a good way of balancing entertainment, which can sometimes be a dirty word in the world of classical music, of balancing entertainment and art, that can really amount in just sustainability of these organizations.
A little bit of Florence Price's single movement piano concerto to get us out of that conversation there. A piece of music that we've platformed here before, but a piece of music that the Du Bois Orchestra has had a lot of experience performing. So shout out to the Du Bois Orchestra. I'll have more information about them and how you can contribute to what they're doing in the description of this. Quickly, Scott, before we get into the final movement, I wanted to ask you again, as we think about orchestras who are participating in anti-racism and transforming the field through the more traditional repertoire. As we think about that, I wonder how your ideas or your relationship with some of that traditional aesthetic has changed or hasn't changed over these past few years as the conversation of DEI and Western classical music has been elevated. When we were talking about this in pre-production, I kept going back to I've never really been all that big on Haydn and Mozart and all that thing in the first place. I like the Romantics and newer and living composers. But it's still music that you have had to advocate for. That's right. Despite that, That's right. I really feel like I'm still on the tip of an iceberg, though, of discovery. Mm-hmm. And even though I can talk to people a lot about Florence Price or about Nathaniel Dett or George Walker, any of these composers that we've been highlighting here, in particular the last few weeks. I feel like there's still more and more room for that. I don't know if I'm answering your question. Because I guess what I'm getting to is 5 years ago, not 5 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, listening to a Mozart symphony followed by a Vivaldi concerto followed by a Haydn symphony followed by a Beethoven overture may not have sounded out of place to me. Maybe, you know, back when I was in school or whatever. Now that sounds wrong to have that aesthetic for so long, you know, and that's something that this work has changed in me. My ear has been changed by this work.
I see what you're getting at now. Yeah. That comes with listening and discovery, though.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that there's plenty of people out there that you read off those names and you go, oh, that sounds like a classical station or a classical concert. Okay. And through the work on this podcast over the last 3 years, my eyes have been open to different things that would work well.
Yeah.
You know, these different composers. And like I said, I still stand by the idea that it's just the tip of an iceberg that I feel like I have.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's get into this fourth movement. I'm going to stick with the Florence Price single movement concerto because toward the end here, there are a lot of trills, both orchestrally and in the solo. So let's take a listen. To let that one play all the way to the end because I love it so much. Shout out to the New Black Repertory Ensemble. All sorts of trills
everybody
there at the end. Yeah, I loved it. All right, just some quick TRILLOQUY, some quick trills here for this fourth movement. Anna Netrebko, what are you doing? Look.
Did something else happen?
You cannot paint any part of your face black.
Oh, right,
so she came. This is an opera, I believe, an opera singer who came out with a new recording, and on the album art, down her lips down, sort of like in a diagonal, is painted black.
Hands too.
And you put me on to the fact that she has gotten in trouble for this in the past. I'm reading from the New York Times. No, this is the Observer from February 2020, right before everything happened. I'll post it in the link, in the description. But she's this article, brings up her role as Aida, and if engaging in the skin darkening, the blackface was really necessary. So back then, she responded by saying, "Blackface and black body for Ethiopian princess for Verdi's great opera. Yes, it is necessary." This is bad, and we're seeing it repeated. So the lesson has not been learned. So, somebody tell Anna Netrebko and tell everybody else over there in opera, you cannot paint your face, any part of your face black, and you cannot darken your skin with makeup to have the look of someone who is black or someone who is of color. Just stop. Just full stop. Not for a Halloween costume, not for your opera production, not for anything. I've been hanging on to that one for a couple of weeks. I just needed to make sure that I stated that. Okay.
You feel better, bro.
Final thing I wanted to bring in, and this is something that I know doesn't impact or affect a lot of people, but enough folks in the arts that I feel like it's a conversation that we need to have more and more. So as I approach the 1-year anniversary of working independently, I've been learning a lot about grant processes specifically. And, you said off mic that you've never applied for a grant, so I think that's an example, just an anecdote there about how, fringe, for lack of a better word, this issue can be for people. But this is the way I think about it. And this is how I've sort of talked my way into boiling down my frustration right now, specifically when it comes to nonprofit organizations and grant funding. All right, let's go to the for-profit side for a second. I saw a statistic the other day. We were watching a special on Vice, I think Vice News, and it said that Jeff Bezos could give every one of his employees a $100,000 bonus and still be richer than he was when the pandemic began. Okay.
But would he have gone into space?
Maybe not. See, and that's part of the problem. But it's easy to see how that's ridiculous how there is so much money hoarding out here and so much more good that can be done, but it's just not happening. And let me make sure I'm not making any assumptions. The idea of Jeff Bezos giving all of his employees a $100,000 bonus and still being, as rich as he is not a bad idea, right? Or an idea that too many people would poo-poo on or disagree with, right? Okay.
Right.
So I don't work in the nonprofit sector. I find myself on the nonprofit side of things more when it comes to specifically when it comes to applying for grants for TRILLOQUY and the other work that I do throughout the week. What I see is nonprofit organizations, philanthropic organizations, foundations of giving that are doing something similar. They could give so much more, but are worried about the maintenance of their endowments. The number that a lot of people throw around is 5%. 5% giving means that your endowment can grow from year to year and your organization exists in perpetuity. Earlier in this opus, Scott, I was asking you if I was stretching by comparing Kanye West to some of the other minimalist music that's out there, Steve Reich and all that stuff. Okay, am I stretching by comparing these two concepts? For-profit people taking care of themselves despite what they could do versus nonprofit organizations holding on to that endowment and even setting up a way for it to grow over the years and not giving at the rate that they could. Is that a stretch comparing those two things?
I see what you're coming. I see the comparison that you're making. The problem is that having so little knowledge of it, I would just open my mouth and insert my foot.
And I feel
I don't know what you want me to say.
I was asking you. I explained, the perspective that I had.
Yeah, I get that. I get what you're saying here.
I feel like your reasoning for not jumping in is the primary weapon that these nonprofit organizations have. They are used to being seen by folks who don't actually have to deal with them as these all good, benevolent organizations when they're hoarding money, hoarding resources in the same way, in similar ways as the the for-profit side of it does. I think if we started to really compare the Jeff Bezoses with the insert foundation here, the conversation of the rate to which these folks need to be giving would open up. But again, most people, the majority of people, even the majority of people who work in classical music don't actually have to fill out these grant applications and don't actually have to deal with the challenges and the complications of maintaining a 501c3, the board, the paperwork, the audits you have to do. So, as again, I don't know if I mentioned, but as I approach my 1 year anniversary of doing this stuff independently, it's just one of those conversations that has been circling around in my mind based on the things that I have to do to keep myself afloat and to keep the work afloat, and I think there's folks not really also in this conversation centering the fact that those of us who walk this path, we're not out here trying to, most of us anyway, we're not out here trying to install a pool or have an addition done to our home or whatever. We're out here doing the best we can with what we got. So it's not like we're trying to hoard the money. We're trying to actually incite systems change. I certainly am in the work that I do here and away from this podcast. So I hope that as I continue to move forward, I can figure out a way to really make this conversation clearer and more important to the majority of the people that it does not impact directly, because it's definitely a system that is going to have to be challenged and that a few of us are really having to fight in a real way, but a challenge nonetheless. As you say all the time, just because it's not happening to you doesn't mean it's not happening or doesn't mean it's a problem. So, as I move forward, I want to make sure that folks are thinking about, that there are a lot of us out here just trying to get a few shekels from these foundations who have tens of millions of dollars in their endowment piggy banks. If they gave more, even if they approached giving in a way that didn't allow for perpetuity, so much could be done. Yes, maybe Jeff Bezos giving $100,000 to all of his employees means he can't play with his toy rocket ship and go into space, but that still does not mean it shouldn't be done. I think there's similar conversations that we need to begin to have with nonprofit organizations. In the coming weeks, I need to have a nonprofit or a foundation person, somebody in charge of giving on this show, so we can open up that conversation a little bit.
I'd be interested to hear.
And I guess I'm really thinking about it because I got a grant application that's due next week.
Hey.
So I'll jump through the hoops for now. But yeah, thank you for listening, and I'll see y'all next week.